I work sort of behind the scenes with Louise and Ed at the Center of Addiction and Faith. And we're so pleased to have you guys here for this next session of our book club with Reverend Barry Lehman. Thank you, sir, who I will pass the baton to now. Folks are still trickling in, but once again, there will be a recording of today's session on our website, and we'll share that link with you guys as well as on our YouTube page. And towards the end, we'll give a little update on what's to come with the center. And with that, take it away, Barry. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie. Hi, everybody. It's good to be back. I think everybody's been here already before, so you've seen me or met me already. So I'm not going to bother with that unless you really need to. I'm in long-term recovery myself since October 1988. And it's great to be around some of the people here in the Center of Addiction and Faith, because I'm a newcomer compared to some of them, which is really fun to say I'm a newcomer, because I spend most of the time as the old timer. In any case, let me go to sharing my screen and start the, let's start the video, or not the video, the slideshow. And of course, that's me, the introduction. This is part 3. We've already done parts 1 and 2, the basics and what mastery is. Remembering that mastery is a process that helps us get better at things that are important to us, the things that are interesting to us. It's practicing and growing our skills. Mastery is technically the middle part of this process of what's called motivation. Dan Pink, in his book on motivation called Drive, is where I got a lot of this stuff. But that's the basic long-term recovery journey right there. As we stay sober, we discover our skills and we build goals, we practice and grow them. We live with purpose and gratitude. We celebrate and grow deeper. Now, last week, I had this one slide that I forgot to share. And by the way, I'm planning on putting all 4 PowerPoints into a flip book, which is fairly easy to do. And I'll make that available after next week when they're all together. So if you want these, you can certainly do it that way. There's a passage in that Bill W. wrote years ago called On Emotional Sobriety. And I forgot to talk about that last week, because that's really what the ongoing life of mastery and recovery is all about. Coming together in life, it's emotional sobriety. I'm looking for the quote. Since AA began, said Bill W., I've taken immense wallops in all the areas of my life because of my failure to grow up emotionally and spiritually. My God, how painful it is to keep demanding the impossible, and how very painful to discover finally that all along we have had the cart before the horse. As we move forward, peace and joy may still elude us, he says, but he then goes on to talk about this orientation of mastery. He doesn't use that phrase, but he talks about becoming emotionally sober. And he felt at the time that he wrote that it was an important piece. This is what it's all about: mastery, staying on the path. It is a rewarding path, but it's something that's going to take practice. And humility, toughness, acceptance, and presence. That's really the whole process. But I wanted to get that across, that even back, I guess it was 1959 or 60, Bill W. was talking about emotional sobriety, which is really what long-term recovery is all about. Today, as we look at these, what it was like to live in long-term recovery. And the word that came to mind when I was putting the book together and in part 3 of the book is balance. I spent some time out in Death Valley and other places, and this is one of those supposed balancing rocks at, I think is maybe Joshua Tree, but it's the balance is, of course, what's the word? Illusory, because this is really solid. Nothing's going to knock. I mean, all the earthquakes along the San Andreas Fault and that haven't knocked it over yet, but it does happen. And balance is what we're really talking about in all of this. Well, what is balance? These are things that we say, gee, am I in balance if if we're restless, irritable, or discontent? If we have fear, anxiety, or stress, self-pity, resentments, moving on to being physically or emotionally drained. Well, the answer to that is no, that's not balance. Not by any stretch of the imagination. Oops. Living in long-term recovery is really discovering balance in the midst of paradox. That's one of the words that's often used, because, you know, the only way we're going to get serenity is if we live in balance, but life is going to regularly throw us off. So when digging around in some of the work that I was doing at the time I wrote the book, I came across a whole bunch of things that are part of the paradoxes that we live in. And if we move too much to either side, unbalanced, we go back to those: restless, irritable, and discontent, anxiety, stress, and so on. We don't want those. So how do we discover balance? Well, the first paradox is perhaps the basic one that that we deal with in recovery. These others come along with it, but that first one is powerless and empowered. We start out with, you gotta admit you're powerless. Unfortunately, I've heard people say, and I've heard people tell others, that in essence, you're always going to be powerless. Well, yes, you're powerless over alcohol and your life becomes unmanageable. Sure, that's what step 1 says. But that does not mean you do not get empowered. I stress that over and over in everything I talk about. That's what the steps are all about. Bill W. himself, in the early part of the big book, before it even gets to how it works, talks about being empowered. We get rocketed into a 4th dimension, a new dimension of life, is how he described it. It's beyond powerlessness, it's becoming empowered. And that happens through personal and community. You have this, it's about me. Obviously, in early recovery, I have to focus on myself. But in long-term recovery, if I'm only focusing on myself, I'm not working in community. I'm not practicing what we often refer to as 12-step work, carrying the message to alcoholics who still suffer. It's that back and forth of community and personal. I grow when I help others. When I help others, I hope they grow. We build a community together. We build an opportunity together. One of the things there were 3 AA meetings I went to regularly for many, many years back in Wisconsin when I first got sober. And there was a group of us that went to all 3 of those meetings. We'd see each other, and they were in different locations. One happened to be in the basement of my church that I was the pastor at, which was my home meeting. But the other 2 were, one was in another, they were all in church basements. They weren't part of a club, any of the AA clubs. They were all one meeting a week right there, one at my church, one at that church in the next town, and one in the other town over here. We traveled around. We were with each other. We were a community. I believe somebody has their mic on, because I'm getting an echo from time to time, so I just wanted to double check that. In any case, that's what it's all about. And the key to that is this thing that we call vulnerability. Step one shows us an amazing paradox. We are unable to be rid of the alcohol obsession until I first admit that we're powerless over it. The more we fight being powerless over it, the more powerless we become. That's one of those statements that probably no one who's been through recovery would doubt. The more I fought it, the harder it was. That's what this is all about. Brad Stolberg, and this is the other side of it. These two go together. The powerlessness, empowered, and personal and community. This is, and here's the link down there at the bottom. Again, as I said, you'll get all these later. When things are going well, community pushes you and celebrates you and keeps you grounded. When things aren't going well, a tribe of support gets you back on your feet. There's that balance we keep talking about. Personal and community. That's how we develop mastery. If you go back to that whole process, that cycle that I showed, one of the things that happens in that process is we get mentors. That's an essential part of mastery. You find people who are willing to support you and criticize you. They were there to tell you, hey, maybe you're off base here a little. An essential part of mastery. If I go to my trumpet mentor, for example, which I get to do only about once a year, to be in person with him, if all he did was listen to me and say, "Okay, Barry, you're doing great, keep at it," I'm not going to grow. I need to go back on a regular basis and find out, what am I not doing well? I need to learn how to do that myself, and then I need to find out where to get the help to find the support. When things are going well, I go to the community to celebrate. Keeps me grounded. When things aren't going well, I get the support that says, hey, try this. And to get from one to the other, the old line, how? How does it happen? Honesty, openness, and willingness. So let's talk about that a little. Anybody have any thoughts or ideas from that?
Go ahead, Fred.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
what you're saying there about the empowered part are, well, first of all, I'm learning to live with paradox, and it's
That's
not
a tough one.
comfortable.
Yeah.
It's not comfortable, but I get it now. The part when you said about empowered, I realize when I need to say to myself, I am powerless once I take a drink. I'm very powerful, or I'm empowered before I take that drink. And that's how I've been looking at my recovery, is that I have resources, everything I need to keep from taking that first drink. Once I do, I'm doomed. And
that's right on target. Right on target. And where do you get that power to stay sober? Where does that come? It comes from the community. It comes from your study. It comes from taking your inventory, your own personal, all those things, all those tools. And next week, I'll talk about the tools. Excuse me. I'll talk about the tools that we use and the principles that those tools support as we build this process of long-term recovery. You're right on target. The better we are at maintaining our sobriety before, so we don't take that first drink, the more likely we are not to take that first drink. Great insight. Yeah.
I'm I'm just realizing there's a sense that this journey we're on with 12 stepping is about addiction and all that goes with it. There's also life and all that goes with life. And I don't know if I'm separating two things that are inseparable, but I find that my substance of choice isn't my challenge or my point of vulnerability, quote, anymore, as much as living relationships like a spouse that I find myself working on the dysfunctionality of my relationships. Help me.
Yeah, you're right. The longer one remains, I'll use the word abstinent, start with the word abstinence, and you move into being a sober thinker. You think in a sober way, that moves into recovery. The point there being the substance, depending on circumstances, is not nearly at the front of your thought. It's the chance somebody once, and this, who knows where these statements come from, said, if you have 10 years sobriety, it may take you 5 years before you use again if you start back on the process. I don't believe that, by the way. I think it can happen pretty quickly, depending on how good that program is. If you're white knuckling it for 10 years, it's not going to take 5 years to go back to using. But the longer you're working a program, the longer you're developing a lifestyle. And that's what I think you're getting at here. The lifestyle of recovery. Recovery is not something that we can set over here and say, okay, I'm not in recovery. I'm not going to think about recovery. Well, you got to think about recovery. You got to think about how you're living. And that's what long-term recovery, I think, is all about. And I think that's why mastery has, for me anyway, is one way of describing the process I do. It's the way I stay focused on what's important to me. It's not the only way. I believe it probably is the only way, because it's how we do anything like that. I mean, it's not something that we can turn on or off in that sense. Whenever we want to become better at something, this is what the process is. Just that simple. You want to use the 12 steps to stay sober? Go for it. You want to use smart recovery? Go for it. If you want to use celebrate recovery, go for it. And I keep working on the idea of a book on spirituality and mastery, and just the idea of being spiritual and working the mastery process. I keep scribbling ideas down because I think this idea of mastery works on lots and lots of things. I'm applying it to recovery is all I'm really doing with this process. It's not all that original. It's just taking something that works and applying it to recovery. And here's how I do it. But you're right. We want to separate the two. When in reality, once we separate them, we're going to lose one or the other.
That makes sense.
Go ahead.
That just was saying that's helping. It's helping to make it make sense. Yeah. I go to my meeting that I am regular with, and sometimes I'm confused whether I'm in a therapy session or a 12-step gathering. And maybe the answer is yes.
I don't know how many of you know this book. It's not as common as it used to be, 24 hours a day. For those of us who are older than some of the AA books, that are out there. This was the only, this for many, many years, this was the only meditation book available. I think it was originally published in 1954. Hazelden is the one who owns the copyright on it. And this is what all AA meetings I went to in my first few years sober read from. And all you had to do at any of those meetings was say, just look up January 6th.
Oh,
You know that?
it takes on new meaning now.
Yeah.
Politics.
Oh, okay. I wasn't thinking that. Well, as a part of the church, January 6th is also Epiphany.
Yes.
And I keep reminding myself of that this is about an epiphany. Keeping sober is the most important thing in my life. The most important decision I ever made was my decision to give up drinking. I am convinced that my whole life depends on not taking that first drink. Nothing in the world is as important to me as my own sobriety. Everything I have, my whole life, depends on that one thing. Can I afford ever to forget this, even for 1 minute? And, every year on January 6th, the meetings we go, yeah. Now they tell us in some meetings, you can't read from that book. It's not conference approved. Well, it may be true.
I read it every day, and it's a wonderful gift and an exasperating struggle, because sometimes the theology is so messed up. But it's a huge gift, and it keeps me grounded.
Right. And that's really, somebody once argued with me, well, your family should be more important. No. If I give up my sobriety, if it's not number one, my family's going to lose. I'm going to lose my family. My job? No. Of course, now being an alcoholic or an addict is willing to say it's all or nothing. And so you can't do that kind of thing. You have, again, we're back to balance. And in order to live well, and that takes us back. Let me go back and I'll look at the, let's look at the balance here and the idea of balance. And you can see here what we're talking about with life. This is life. Sometimes we work, sometimes we play. What's the balance? If all we do is work, we're going to be pretty dull creatures. If all we do is play, we're not going to get much done. Fast and slow. Our brains, this one was interesting when I found this one. Daniel Kahneman, who just died a couple weeks ago, Pulitzer Nobel Prize winning, he wasn't an economist, he was a psychologist. He won the Nobel Prize for economics because he showed how people think. There's fast thinking and slow thinking. And we need both. They're structured and improvised. This is where creativity gets in, as well as curiosity. These are the kind of things that hey, this is interesting. Let me go dig into this. But the structure, we build the structure of our recovery. And then when something comes along that we're not used to, we're going to have to improvise. On the Mastering Recovery newsletter, I just started working on something for later next month, tomorrow, about jazz and improvising, and how that all fits in together with recovery. Art and science, those are things that we're talking about here. Everything in our life has to find a balance. And what you're talking about here is right on target with that's what life is. And one of the more important, and this one we can probably take the next half hour talking about, the material and the spiritual. When I put that up, what's your first thought?
Well, I'm gonna say, why do we separate them?
Okay,
I mean, I know that's
that's a
not,
good question. Good
you know,
question.
it's not what you were looking for, Barry, but
No.
it's just like we we are compelled to do these bifurcations or these alienated either ors. And I mean, we're made of material and we're made of spirit. So I want to integrate.
And that's what's called balance. That's what balance is. You notice I didn't say material or spiritual. I didn't say work or play because I'm trying not to make the binary choice.
right.
And you caught it. You're right on target. Why do we have to separate them? Where do we experience the spiritual? Well, among other places, in this physical body that we're in. We don't understand how the brain develops consciousness. So yeah, every now and then you'll see somebody come up with a new theory, and maybe someday we'll figure it out. I doubt it. It's where it comes from, what it's about. But moving beyond that, what are the connections we make? How do we make connections? Why do I respond to one person differently than I do to another? And it may have nothing to do with whether they're a good person or a bad person, or whether they are smart or not smart, whether they're introverted or extroverted. Take all those, and it has to do with something beyond the material. That's the spiritual side. But we only experience in the physical body. That's all we got.
So
Well,
I'm sort
Go
of
ahead.
I'm sort of reluctant to even say this because when I saw that, I'm like, what does that mean? But I'm just going to jump out there and say the thing that comes to my mind is seen versus unseen.
Ooh, okay, I like that idea. That's another one of those paradoxes. Yeah.
well,
There's the. Go ahead.
well, it's just I'm a biblical pastor, and I mean Paul just divides them all the time with, avoid the body of
Yeah.
the material and elevate the spiritual. When you're spiritual, you're in and with it, and when you're consumed with the material, you're bad. And it's a
That's a lack of balance right there.
right.
And the old joke, if all you're interested in is getting to heaven, you're no earthly good. That's one that goes back many years, but it's that same thing. And I think you're right on target. They're not separable. We experience one in the other. And what Paul's talking about is what he would call sin or sinfulness is in the body, because that's where well, first of all, he didn't understand, and they didn't talk about these things the way we do today. And the other piece is very simply, it's often the things of the body that cause us to sin, which we're greedy, we want this, we want that. It's pride, it's all those other things uh, that we have traditionally said. Yeah. So, Fred, I think, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, something I've been struggling with in a good way, a good struggle, challenge, has to do with my understanding of faith and putting it in a historical context. And more, I'm coming to the conclusion that our Western thought, which also has to do with Christian thought, is heavily influenced by Greek thought.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get this Platonic Plato, the ideal. And so that lends itself much to the dichotomy, either or. You're good, you're bad, all these things. Or there's this idea that somehow there is, finding the way for me. And if I don't find the way, then I'm off the way. And I truly believe this where AA has really helped me with God of my understanding
Mhm.
and these paradoxes. I'm here to find my way each and every day.
Yeah.
And who knows really sometimes where that's going. I really appreciate the 11th step, because I want to reinterpret it as Fred is going to improve his conscious contact with God, so I have the direct line and I can tell you all what God's saying. And much to my disappointment, that's not what the step says.
Okay.
And especially the way it's written, only for knowledge of God's will for me and the power to carry that out.
And there's that empowerment piece again.
Right.
We're powerless, but we are empowered. You're really on target, I think, with what the 12 steps do talk about, and they're constant. We know enough about Bill W. to know that he wrestled with that one a lot. He was very self-centered. He wanted to be the center of attention. He was that kind of a guy, as are many of us. That means he was probably an alcoholic. But and he fought with that. He fought to find emotional sobriety. It's really what we're talking about here. And in order for that to happen, we have to give up the answer that we have all the answers. That there's this, I'm going back to Beth, seen and unseen. What we can see is not all there is. What we see in any one of our friends, at any meeting, in God, is far from all that there is. I've heard this around some meetings from time to time. If I can explain all there is about God, then it's not a God I can worship. Because if I can understand all there is about God, God's not unknowable anymore. God's not unseen. God's not beyond all that we have. And God's not all powerful if I'm smart enough to figure God out. And that whole idea just keeps pushing me and pushing me. This world, this life, this life of recovery is far greater than anything that we think about, and we just we haven't even begun to touch it. Which is why I say, if you think you've gone as far as you can go in your recovery, you're at the beginning. That's what the promise is. We'll be amazed before we're halfway through. So what does it mean to be spiritual? I found the Chaplain's Corps of the U.S. Navy has a spiritual fitness guide. It's based on Western thought and Western religion. So, okay, but and this is what they came up with. And by the way, this will all be in. I'm going to add that January 6th reading, but this will be in that flip book I put together next week. The material and the spiritual, engaged in life's meaning and purpose. We do this in our lives, is what we're talking about, the material. We discover hope. And in this fitness guide, it has 4 areas and shows them falling apart until over here, you're ready to be as immoral as possible. So it really moves across the spectrum. But this is your assessment. Am I hopeful about life in the future? Do I make a person who's spiritual, has strong spirituality, can make sound moral decisions? They're fully engaged with family, friends, and community. They're able to forgive self and others. They're respectful of others. They're engaged in their core values and beliefs. This is what Chaplain's Corps of the U.S. Navy is, and I think it's pretty darn good. Oops. The other piece, and I haven't talked much about vulnerability, that was back here. Over the past 10, 12 years, at least where I hang out in the world of primary treatment and psychiatry, psychology, Brene Brown. If you have not heard of Brene Brown, look her up. And everybody's going, yeah. An incredible human being who also has been in recovery for many years. And she has a way about talking about vulnerability. That may be the biggest reason we don't move from powerless to empowered. She jokingly says, well, I don't do vulnerability. Well, if you don't, your chances are you're not going to stay sober. I'd go that far. Because, vulnerability allows us to take this both and live with it. Vulnerability says, yeah, I'm in recovery for a long time, but in the right or wrong circumstance, I could be over here back on day one. I must never forget that. That's the vulnerability of the addict or the alcoholic. It's my basic vulnerability. Paul would talk about it as my basic sinfulness. I mean, if he would take it into that big realm of being sinful. Other religious approaches wouldn't necessarily put it that way, but it's still what we're talking about. That which am I going to be open? Am I going to be willing to confess who I am? Am I going to be able to say, I'm an alcoholic, teach me, and then be willing to do what people want? If you look at the HOW, and I play with this kind of wordplay all the time, that's those three parts of mastery. Honesty, this is what I need to do. This is the foundation of what I need to do. Openness, now I'm going to practice it. And then the willingness to go out and live that way. I mean, we can play with all these things if we want. But it all boils down to the same thing. Bob, you had your hand up.
It just occurs to me that secrecy is a dangerous place to be because it's isolating. If I'm keeping a secret, I'm not being transparent. And if I'm not being transparent, I'm alone. And, 1 Peter 5:8, the devil, like a roaring lion, prowls about looking for a loner because we're no match alone for the demonic. And if I'm not willing to be truly transparent and vulnerable, I'm holding a part of me that's broken, that has power over, I'm giving it more power over me. I'm allowing it to isolate me. And I think about that wildebeest that is lunch for the lioness. I mean, it's just so that vulnerability is so essential because without it, you're alone.
Now, of course, the danger in that is those of us who tend to go extremes on anything. The danger is I'm going to tell you everything about myself.
Yes, right.
And I don't need you to know everything about me.
Right. But somebody needs to know.
But somebody needs to know. It
Yeah.
may be that I, in my early recovery, some of that had to do with going beyond the initial fourth and fifth and sixth and seventh steps. When I had to make that list of names, there was an admission of my vulnerability because I want to say I was wrong. I'm trying to do it differently. That's vulnerability. It isn't going up to them and saying, oh, all these awful things I've done in life. I'm going to tell you all about them. No, 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 no. It's what do you need to know about me? And what do I need to tell you? It's without judgment of you or me, just saying, I'm sorry. I mean, it's well beyond that. I could tell as a pastor, I before I became a counselor, after I got sober, I regularly was doing fifth steps. I was hearing fifth steps in the community. And sitting in my office there, and all of a sudden people would start to, Richie, or that's a Pennsylvania Dutch word if I ever heard it. And hell, I grew up in Pennsylvania, but they get restless, irritable, and discontent. And I'd sit there and listen, and then I'd say, anything else to say? And you could see them thinking. And they would finally go either, nope, that pretty well covers it, or yeah, there's one more thing. And that's where I heard about things happening while they were soldiers in Vietnam, or things about their family when they were growing up, or even things they did a few months earlier before they got sober. That big thing that's been weighing them down. And I became at that point, as a person in recovery and as a pastor, one who could give a sense of movement, a sense of forgiveness.
Right.
And that's where the community, we're back to the community again. Just like I know the things I shared with the chaplain at the treatment center that nobody else other than my wife knows. The things I shared with my sponsor when I later did a fifth step with him. That he's the only one that really needed to know. None of them are as powerful or as secretive as some of the other stuff. But that's what empowers me, is my honesty, my openness, and my willingness to be who I am created to be.
Well, if you do a really great job of 11/12ths of a fifth step, what's going to actually lead you back to drink?
Yeah. Secrecy is the only thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And for that, I am so incredibly grateful today. Yeah. I must have been scared to death of I know I was, but in ways that even I wasn't aware of at the time, because I don't know why I kept working this program as hard as I did. Other than I was scared. I really was, and I don't know whether I'm still scared. I don't think fear is the reason anymore. After years of long-term recovery, it basically starts with, I don't want to lose what I have. What I got is just so incredible. To go backwards would be, insane. I had a person say that they were in the medical profession, and here in Minnesota, they had to go through a process with where for 5, 6, 7 years they were monitored after they got clean and sober. And they said to me, I'm about to retire. How am I going to stay clean and sober? I don't have to worry about them back there anymore. And I said, I don't want to lose this. Wow. This incredible life that I have been gifted with, this lifestyle that is built on recovery, honesty, openness, and willingness, and all those other things. That's why I do what I do. That's why I'm still working at the clinic and still doing primary groups. That's why I wrote this book. That's why I do these things. Partly for me, and partly to say, hey, there's something out here. There's something really exciting out here.
Barry,
Yes.
just some things, some thoughts you had there. Yeah, I mean, I think the big part about sobriety is you realize early on you start doing the sobriety for yourself,
Yes.
and all the other things follow. And so it is about me. And there's a pot when you're talking about give this all up. A couple of people have a podcast on no more wasted days,
Mm,
and that's just saying, you know, if we go back to drinking and using, we're going to have wasted days,
right.
and we don't want to waste them anymore. They're too
Hmm.
precious. The other part when you mentioned about devotional books, you mentioned January. This is in daily reflections, and I can still see the fella at the meeting when he read this as part of on January 20th. Today, I humbly ask my higher power for the grace to find the space between my impulse and my action, to
Mm,
let a cooling breeze, let flow a cooling breeze when I would respond with heat, to interrupt fierceness with gentle peace, to accept the moment which allows judgment to become discernment, to defer to silence when my tongue would rush to attack or defend. I promise to watch for every opportunity to turn toward my higher power for guidance. I know where this power is. It resides within me. As clear as the mountain brook hidden in the hills, it is the unsuspected inner resource.
mm.
And when you were talking about balance and you mentioned the hazelnut, I mean, I love that too. That I can still, just the cooling breeze, all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, that's it. Because there's no,
Yeah.
there's still, that's my mastery. That's why I'm here.
Yes.
Because at times there's not much breeze in my life. I'm just a rushing wind, ready
So
to.
what do you do when that happens?
Well, what I'm learning more and more is before I say anything, I have to pause,
Okay.
and I just have to pause, and if I
And
can
that's what
pause.
long-term recovery has given you,
Mhm.
that ability to know that.
Oh yes, I mean that
Yeah.
exactly. I mean
Yeah.
that's when you said about Bill and emotional sobriety. I realized this is something. Yes, I'm not even better at it. I'm aware of it. Let's say,
Mm.
let's say that. Now I'm practicing how to pause. Now I know what to do. Um, and the other part of my recovery is, especially step 10, looking at where do I have to make amends, and those become, oh, there's my character defect popping up. if if I keep needing to make amends in a certain way, I think there's something to look at.
Again, that's the awareness of mastery. The mastery of it's, you have built that awareness within you. You've built the habit of catching those. Sometimes I've had enough instances where it's taken a couple months to catch them, but it still is, because I'm not perfect. I mean, and the longer we're in recovery, sometimes the small things we don't notice them anymore. Yeah, they're kind of hidden over here somewhere, and they don't feel like relapse. That's some steps down the road. But yeah. Relapse begins long before you take that drink. Anybody else? Well, next week we bring it all together, and basically, next week I'll be summing up what the basics are, the tools and the tools and the principles for us to utilize on our regular daily lives of building and taking inventory. I think that's one of those essential pieces in that middle part of getting the input from others and going back and building on the foundations and discovering what they are. Thank you all for being here. I've been enjoying this. I want to make sure everybody knows about the conference this year. Well, it is going to be virtual. We're not going to be in person. We don't get to look at Ed and give him a hard time in person, but Katie.
Thank you so much, Reverend Barry, for these sessions and for sharing that. Yes, lots of news to keep up to date on with the Center of Addiction and Faith. I'm going to share a link as we close out today in the chat for another session taking place tomorrow. And you can register for free for that as well, another book club, and you can stay up to date on our website and on our YouTube channel for any sessions that you guys may have missed. And we look forward to seeing everyone again next week. And I'll post in the chat as well, if you'd like to support the center, a good link for that. And we thank Barry once again and all of you guys for being here. You make it happen.
Thank you.